to start our recording now. We are recording. My name is Clara Anderson Sante with Gilda's Club Kansas City, and we're going to start with our Executive Director, Siobhan McLaughlin-Leslie, to start our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Town Hall. Welcome, everybody.
Well, welcome and good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for joining us and having the interest and commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. The vision of Gilda's Club Kansas City is so that no one faces cancer alone. And we realize that to achieve our vision, we have to be committed to social justice, being social justice advocates, and we need to ensure that our organization values and is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. In order to develop a plan to make sure that our organization truly is welcoming, we really needed to best understand how our actions, and our culture are perceived by those both inside our organization and outside. So in order to do this, we set up a three-phased plan. And I'll talk a little bit about phase one. Clara will go into phase two, and then Broderick will bring us home with phase three. So our organization, as I said, is committed to formalizing a DEI plan. And phase one was for us to form a task force to figure out the roadmap. We are fortunate to have two diversity, equity, and inclusion officers who are members of our board of directors. One is from the healthcare industry, and another is from private industry. We also wanted to include some folks who participate in our programming. So we have two program participants. We included two community partners and then two staff, Clara and myself. And the task force was set up to come up with our initial steps. We created a cultural assessment around DEI that was going to go to all stakeholders of our organization: participants, staff, contractors, board, volunteers, and community partners. And then the task force was set to compile the data and analyze any gaps. We were pleased to have over 100 participants, specifically 134. I'm going to let Clara go into the details of what our findings were.
Thanks, Siobhan. And we just threw this up there so you could see what we asked, although I think a lot of people on the town hall probably did take the survey, but just as a reminder, these were kind of the questions that we were trying to establish a baseline before coming up with a plan. Because even though we've had these conversations informally all these years, we really wanted to make it more intentional and to drive our work forward based off this feedback. So these were kind of the questions we had, and then I will kind of share who it was that took that survey. So the demographic report out was kind of a mixed bag in terms of program participants, our community partners, our volunteers, our board, our staff, contractors, and others. So it was kind of more evenly or a mix there. Our racial breakdown is below. So as you see kind of all together, majority were straight white women. So I use that as a lens as we talk about the survey results and the need to kind of continue this work so that we can kind of also shift these demographic numbers in terms of who we're reaching, who we're serving. And it's definitely a part of our organizational plan to make sure that we are truly a free community resource that's accessible to all. So just to kind of give you the context of who wrote these responses, I wanted to start with the demographics. I brought in just a few of the tables. Some aren't as clean and pretty to be able to put into a PowerPoint. And again, all of this, we want to be very transparent, would be available should you want the information. But just the breakdown for GCKC, Gilda's Club Kansas City, in terms of commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion at all levels of the organization. And you can kind of see how that looks both with the percentages up below and as the bar. Also, GCKC is committed to meeting the needs of all participants. There were lots of comments made after each question, which were part of the themes that we'll discuss in just a minute. But what, unfortunately, for the disagree and strongly disagree, there weren't comments that drove why someone necessarily picked that solution. So while we're trying very hard to make sure this is an informed process from all levels of stakeholders of the organization, some of the feedback did not gather kind of enough information to where we need to look specifically to those that disagreed with the comment. And again, everyone at GCKC is treated with dignity and respect. So, high marks in terms of agree and strongly agree. But again, keeping with the frame of who answered that survey, we'll talk a little bit more about a comment there. I'm comfortable sharing my thoughts, opinions, experiences, even though they might not align with those commonly expressed by staff or other participants. Again, making sure that we're truly holding space for anyone's viewpoint, regardless of where they're coming from or cancer experience or impact, or identifying markers. So we did kind of summarize themes through all the hundreds of comments that were left after each question, and then in our open-ended questions of how we can improve. These were kind of the overall themes. So improvements could be made by diversifying staffing, which is definitely something we're very aware of. We haven't had any changes for several years in staffing, when it's something that we really wanted to look for when there was an opening, that we were intentional about this work. Also, the opportunity to diversify our volunteers and the speakers of the program. So there's lots of ways to show diversity, not just in staffing, but as the whole of the organization. There was a comment made about bringing services to places where people already feel comfortable. So prior to the pandemic, we were in 8 locations throughout our city because we knew transportation and location were a big barrier. Zoom helped in some ways because we might have kind of helped with some of those barriers, but we might have increased some for lack of internet, lack of access. So we've talked about creating a community resource library here at the clubhouse to kind of mitigate those barriers. So these are just all the things that we're thinking in terms of our partnerships as we move forward. Is it at a Y? Is it at some community centers? Is it at our churches? Where do we need to go next? Also considering the space and images that are represented in the clubhouse. We are named after Gilda Radner. So, also always honoring who we're named after, but being aware that everyone sees themselves reflected when present at the clubhouse. There's a need for obviously ongoing communication always for board and staff from a variety of DEI angles, expanding our presence in the LGBTQ plus community. And then, someone did bring up that the internet-based programs might have created some barrier in terms of language access, which is something that we're also working on and discussing. And some comments I really just wanted to pull out specifically because I thought it really did sum up what a lot of people were saying, that I do believe Gilda's Club is inclusive once someone gets there, but we need to work on making sure there's community trust and bridges built to diverse communities so that people feel like they would be welcome once they get here, right? So that's really where we're seeing the need, and appreciating that Gilda's Club did make efforts to increase access for diverse communities by our Spanish speaking support groups and Spanish education and individual support by a Latina Spanish speaking individual who works with Gilda's Club. And again, coming back with who filled out the survey, what those demographics look like. I have not experienced anything less than a warm welcome at Gilda's Club, but I'm a white female who doesn't experience exclusion in most situations of my life. And I thought it was worth noting that because a lot of the comments were, I think you're doing a great job. I feel warm and welcome, but we also know that a majority of the survey participants might feel that in most spaces they navigate. And so making sure that, the next time we do a survey and when we really continue this work, that we're making sure we're getting this out to maybe people who don't know us yet to try to get more of that community feedback of how do you perceive Gilda's Club? Do you know about Gilda's Club? How can we build those bridges as the survey commented? So I will turn it over to Broderick Crawford, who's one of the members of our DEI committee, to kind of talk about what the next steps are of our formalizing this plan.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for this particular town hall. Again, as we're looking at how we move forward, and many of the comments that Siobhan and Clara made, I absolutely totally agree, is that we want to make sure that who's missing from the table. How do you identify who's not at the table? And so whether it's in our the board members, our community partners, our program participants, and our staff members, do we have the right makeup of our DEI committee? Is it representative of where we want to go? Not just where we are now, but where we want to go. And does this DEI committee truly look like the diversified group that we want at Gilda's Club? And so how can we make sure, because people resonate with who they look like, people resonate with who they talk like, people resonate with people where they live. And so how are we making all of those types of considerations when we look at our committee? We want to make sure that we're not just, one of the things that I've often challenged many of our groups is we don't want to be doing here just to create data that just sits in a book and sits on a shelf. But how are we able to take the data, the information that we're able to obtain and glean, and then be able to share it with our stakeholders, and not just share it with them, but now how can we implement the information that we have gained? So it's not just about gathering information, it's about putting things into practice. And so we want to put forth a plan that speaks to those action steps. How does Gilda's Club Kansas City take into account everything that has been presented to us and now put it into action in a way that makes us a better place for people to come, for people to visit, for people to feel welcome, for people to be able to move through their cancer pathway in a way that helps and create a positive outcome, and not just a place to go and complain or feel bad or feel down. We want to have a positive impact. So when you visit Gilda's Club, when you leave, you feel better than when you came. And then the final piece is just we need to execute. Again, as I was sharing, that we need to make sure that we are putting action to what has been presented to us. We need to look at how we evaluate, because again, what might work this week may not work next week, or what works this year may not work next year. As we all know, Delta variant is having a impact on us. So hopefully next year that won't be the case. So what we can do this year won't be the same. Regardless, it won't be the same. And again, as we're looking at where we need to be, so what places can we go to introduce folks to Gilda's Club Kansas City? Is it at a church? Is it at a community center? Is it at other places where people would normally gather? Do we need to be there? Do we need to be in barbershops? Do we need to be in nail salons? All those types of places where people gather. How can we make sure that we are allowing individuals in our community, specifically in the cancer community, understand and have knowledge of not only where Gilda's Club is, but the resources that Gilda's Club has to offer? With that, Siobhan, I'll turn it back to you.
I would like to open it up to any questions or comments.